Last video, I started a series called From Nothing to Something, where I go over and create an app from scratch and get our first paying customer. In this video, we're going to go over the onboarding flow and refining the designs a bit more. Alright, welcome back to From Nothing to Something, where I show you how it's possible to actually monetize an app, get revenue and actual customers to get that mobile app. So if you remember where we last left off, we created the initial app, we prototyped it, we defined our ICP and what the app would actually do. In fact, I can pull it up right here. This is where we left off. We created this really nice design right here for our home page. We have a library page, we have a track page, finally our profile with our settings page. Now, in this video, I'm going to be covering design touches and functionality, but arguably the second most important thing when building your app and then getting revenue and customers is your onboarding flow. And I'll be talking more about that later. But for now, we're going to focus on adding functionality. And then we're going to take some of these pages, like for example, logging a dose and adding a vial. We're going to redesign this so it can look a bit better. So I've asked Claude to give me a prompt for the add vial. However, so I've given the prompt to Claude about this. It already knows what I'm talking about in the current context. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this prompt and I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to go to my design tool, Glamour. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new mobile design for this based on what Claude just said, and we're just going to generate that and we're going to let Glamour come up with a better alternative design to this, specifically this right here where you go add a file. Right now it's not bad, however I think that the occupancy of space could be better. Like if you're going to do this, you put like a really nice hero header here or something. The compound, you don't want to really make the user do all that work of like really typing in and having to remember. We want to put it there for the user in terms of maybe buttons or stuff. So while Glamour generates our design that we just gave in for the vial, let's take a look at the logging dose where this plays single-handedly a connection to tracking. And what I'm going to do is the same thing where I'm just going to take this right here and I'm going to go make the design in Glamour, and then it's asking me for follow-up about the vial detail where you tap on it and then it gives more information. Okay, so this is the add a vial. If you take a look at it, it's not bad. I think it's definitely a bit better. We could add some more stuff, like again with the text over here, we could add maybe like a banner kind of on the side of add a vial. There is more information compared to this. I think this one is way more simpler. However, you have to search the compound manually and then you have to do the reconstitution yourself. Notes is practically the same. I like how it shows your dates and then you have your add vial. Um, and more stuff. So I think it's definitely better, but it's not perfect, I'd say. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that and I'm going to copy the code. So I'm going to copy the code and I'm going to give it back to Claude. And I just noticed Glamour just finished creating this design. So let's take a look at that as well and preview it. Yeah, so I really like how more visual it is, and then like the really streak, right? It incentivizes the user to keep tracking and keep using the app. Vial data right here as well, the amounts and both units right here. Then you have your route based on how you inject it, I'm assuming, and then your injection site. So I believe this right here should depict the human body better, but obviously I couldn't really do that to its fullest extent. I like the time and then symptoms. So yeah, that's really good. All I'm gonna do is see if Claude can replace this with an actual holographic depiction of the human body, but it's not bad. We'll take that. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy the code over here, and then I'm gonna go back to Claude. So yeah, I'm gonna give the same things I just told Claude as well as the code to replace with the human body in a holographic animation. I'm gonna quickly do that, come back, show the designs, and then finally attach it to Claude, and then we'll move on to onboarding from there. So Glamour's finished generating majority of the designs. I'm going to quickly go over all of them. So this one is the stack. This is the stack where you basically have like set routine and then you take certain compounds and peptides during specific time periods. And the next one is actual peptide information. So when the user specifically on the library clicks on a specific peptide, it's going to show them this specifically. And we can see that it shows them like the amounts they should use, how it's used, the mechanism, and then we also cite some actual sources, which we're gonna have to fix the UI on. Next, we also have like the cycles. So a user can hop on an active cycle and then an ended cycle. So we can see something they ended is something they completed. So maybe they're doing rehabilitation and they're taking BPC 157. And then an active cycle would look something like this, where you have the weeks completed, you're tracking everything, your dosages, and you edit your cycle, and then you can even delete your cycle. And then finally, I want to show like more peptide information on the vials and dosages. For example, when you took it, how much of it you took, how much of it you have remaining, or you can reconstitute like some, or you can allocate some more dosages, and then your dose history. So more about the dosages and the vial information. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly give this all to Claude Code, and then it's gonna wire it up all one by one, and then we'll have practically our completed design for the app. Now, I'd like to explain arguably the second most important thing about building your app, and that is the onboarding flow. Now, I've categorized the onboarding flow into primarily four components. However, you can feel free to add more things as you like, but I like to cover these four components. Starting with the two on the right, which I think are the most important of them all. This is your journey and your UI UX. So I'll explain basically both of these. So your journey is basically when the user sees your app for the first time, what is the very first thing they're seeing part of your onboarding flow section, and how does it flow and transition? So if you look at these designs, so by the way, none of these designs are mine. I just got off Mobbin, but take a look at this design. So notice how this one flows right into that, right? And then you have a flow right there. So you can kind of see the user retention as it hooks and flows the user, right? But more specifically, your journey is how you position stuff, what you show your user first, middle, last. Basically, think of this like a story. What are you going to show your user first, and what are they going to end on? With keeping in mind your ending is the very last thing they see before the paywall. So in your journey, you need an encompass of the content you show your user of how your app works. You then need to collect, proper user personal info personal information about them maybe, and then more stuff, right? About preferences and things about the onboarding, right? So for your journey, you should be starting with ideally a welcome, right? The user just had to find your app, and then there's also not only did they have to find your app, there was a friction of downloading your app, and that's based on your ASO and how your app even portrays itself in terms of branding. So you have the welcome screen that you should be showing your user. I would then ideally have some screens showing how the app works and then blending it with your content. So you show how the app works and then you blend it with your content, and then you go to ask for personal identifiable information if you need it, and then maybe some preferences, and then finally you end it all with like a tailored personalization, and then you show them the paywall. So your journey really needs to make sense in terms of what you show your user first, and then the pages that accompany the preceding one, they need to make sense in terms of why they're there and are they relevant in terms of the flow. So it flows along really smoothly and you go into each topic that you need while having your user retention. Next, your UI UX, such an important aspect. Take a look at this app right here. Do you notice the amount of visuals and the striking colors and the nice UI UX they have to really keep the user hooked? And that's because you don't want to lose your user. The onboarding flow is a thing that the user sees as soon as they download the app. So the user is quite literally giving a chance on your app to see how it looks maybe. And so you really need to make sure that your onboarding flow has good UI UX and visuals and animations such that it keeps them hooked and that they don't want to leave. So you can see that you use these really nice visuals that are so easy, right? These are buttons, but they're morphed into like these visuals. So you just click on one, and then you have your age selector where you're asking for the information. You have a verification right here to make sure that is the user's phone number, and then it would continue. So you really want to have a good blend of striking visuals that the user potentially forgets the thought lingering in the back of their mind that maybe I don't need this app or something like that. It keeps them hooked at all times. You always want to have that hook right there. The better the visuals and the less the text, as you can see, there's like less than 10 words on this screen alone. And the visuals carry because it's that easy for the user to just click on one. Similar to all of these other pages, look at barely how much text there is on all these pages, right? It's all visuals and all animations that really carry the flow and the retention right there. And that's one thing we need to keep in mind for a winning paywall. All right, moving on to other side. This is the stuff that plays into the retention in itself, and that's forms and fields. Now, specifically, forms and fields is specifically for the information that you get the user to enter. And the reason why is because your app most likely needs some information about the user, especially if it's a B2C app on maybe how they're going to use it, um, other information, right? For our app, Tropin, right, we're going to need to know the user's goals, fitness, their weights, the dosages, and what they're on, that type of stuff. But not only do we need to know that, it keeps the user committed, right? Because when they enter their information, they're more devoted. And the reason why is because each onboarding, right? When you couple it with the journey and the good visuals and the animations, right? The user is inclined to enter their information because the app is something that can benefit them. And when they do, they commit more. So they really have to go through the little micro frictions of just tapping on stuff, reading out what you're asking for, typing in forms, answering fields. And so I'll talk about this after the last aspect, but this is very important during the final pages of your onboarding flow where you go to the paywall. And I'll explain more about that later as to why this is almost a non-negotiable for your B2C app, where you need to have these forms and fields that are relevant to your app to get the user committed. Now, lastly, the content. So when the user downloads your app, they need to know what the app is. However, the hardest thing about this is keeping a trade-off between how much text and just pure content you have about the app itself compared to getting stuff about the user's information, what they want to do, and then visuals and animations. So we want to make sure that we have the content of the pages themselves explain what the app is, but also we're also doing stuff like collecting the user's information so that we can use that later before we get to the paywall, which I'm going to explain. But notice how in these pages right here, they do something very clever, this app. So this app, I'm assuming, is basically taking a personal avatar right here and hooking it up to one of these right here to hold you accountable for wellness, right? You can see it's wellness. And so if you don't do, maybe if you don't hit the gym, then the mood of this cat that you selected, it goes down, right? So that's what I'm inferring. But notice how instead of telling the user that you select one of these and tell her, hey, this is how the app works, it literally tells them, okay, what do you want to use it for? And then it sets it as its default. So notice that it gives the option right here to choose any of these, but then it's like, okay, what peptide do you want to select? So instead of putting the user into the app and telling them, you can select any of these, which one do you want to select so we can configure it before we put you into the app. And so the user selects the cat, and then it's like, okay, what do you want to use it for? Okay. So then you select your motivation of what you want to achieve. And then you finally have this last page, which you would see right before the paywall. Now, all of these combined go to your personalized paywall. Now, this is where these two really come in. Notice how a lot of these apps, they say creating your custom experience. In fitness apps, you'll see especially they create your tailored, customized plan for maybe dieting, fat loss, weight gain, whatever it might be. This one also says you're all set, and it shows the really nice affirmation with the check mark right there. So when I said earlier about forms and fields, the reason why that you need the user to fill those forms out as well as show them the content in a good, meaningful way is because when it comes here, it says creating a custom experience. So it is more personalized to the user, and you then hit them with a paywall. And the reason why this works is because you got the user to fill out information about themselves that is relevant to the app. And so when they get hit with this paywall, with this nice animation that psychologically rewards them for doing that, you then have the paywall. And the reason why the user is more inclined to buy the app and actually go through with the paywall is because of the devotion and the commitment you ask from them when you ask for the fields and forms to fill out. And so when that does is the user fills out the forms and fields, and then you make the app personalized. You tailor the app with the user's information and you make it personalized, and then you get to the paywall, and the user is more inclined to pay because they took the time to really fill that out and they think that it's really beneficial for them. And as a result, that's why they're going to go through. Now, that was a brief analysis of some of the main concepts I think you need for a winning onboarding, but we're going to apply these principles to Tropin, and we're going to curate a dedicated onboarding flow with set amount of pages and then our paywall. And so what we do is we then take those pages in our whole onboarding flow and we connect that with Revenue Cat and Superwall. Superwall especially because Superwall can really track our data for what's working, what the user is clicking on, the views on the paywall, and stuff like that. Combining all of this together, we can curate a winning onboarding flow. And with Tropin in mind, I'll come back, I'll design that, and then we'll briefly break down why this works and why this is a winning onboarding flow. To actually create our onboarding flow for Tropin, all I've done is taken those exact principles that I just talked about earlier with journey, UI UX, forms, fields, and content in mind, and I've taken that and I've curated this whole prompt that I've given to Claude Code, and I've specifically told it I need to emphasize on all of these, and we need to make sure that our app applies all these principles to curate a winning onboarding flow. And what I'm going to do is when Claude gives me this prompt for Tropin's onboarding flow, I'm going to put this inside of Glamor's task force feature, which allows you to create mobile designs in bulk. And so we're going to easily use that for the onboarding right here. And I've kept in mind that the very first design should be like a welcome animation, and then we have our journey that flows to show the correct screens with our animations, the data we collect, and then that we later personalize and tailor the app towards them. And then finally the content. So now Claude has finished making the prompt for Tropin. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Glamor's task force to curate all of these. I'm inside of Glamour and I have Claude's prompt that it has given me. And so what all I'm going to do now is I'm going to press the task force button and I'm going to go to mobile app and I'm going to specifically describe my app idea. And it's a very comprehensive prompt right here. And so I'm going to give it to Claude right here. I'm going to give it to Glamour and we're going to launch task force. And as you can see, we have all these agents building our screens right now. So we have the welcome hero. So this is the very first page the user sees when they land onto our app for the onboarding flow. We then have the goal selection, the experience level, the compound selection, the dosing cadence, the cycle preview, and then the personalized dashboard. And so I'm gonna let Glamour finish those designs. Glamour has finished generating the designs and I've quickly hooked them up to Claude. So real quick, now I'm going to show you what our onboarding looks like for Tropin and how users will see it for the first time. Now, this is what it looks like. There is a splash animation kind of when you open the app, like fades into the Tropin logo. But obviously we're gonna add more branding right there. We don't even have any branding done. We're gonna add that right there. And then to confirm your age, we're gonna move that to a different spot for verification. But let's say I'm 18 and older. We have some more legal terms. Now, it took the branding right there. We're gonna obviously replace this. I like how we have this. So the other two, we should remove that. This is the first thing we're gonna see. This is the very first thing we're gonna see with the Tropin logo. And so this is the welcoming screen, right? This we're telling the user this is all what the app does. So then we select one. So let's say the comp and longevity. So let's go with longevity and recovery. After we've chosen our goals, we now go with the experience level. Tropin's asking how experienced you are with using peptides. So I can say, I have some experience. I've run on a cycle or two. And then we're asking, what are you on? Again, a bit crowded, but we can finalize this later. So let's say for this example, we're on BPC 157 and terzepatide. And so now it's showing the profile on terzepatide, on the half-life, stuff like that, etc. And then how often do you dose? So let's go with weekly. And then it's showing our whole week right here. So this is like if we commit, it's gonna be this Monday, every single Monday of this week. Obviously, it should be pulling real-time data on what the date and time is. So it'd be Wednesday right now. So it'd be every Wednesday if we were to do it today, and that should be able to modify. And that should be able to be modified. Now let's do lock in my schedule. Now we have something where we ask for body weight and our gender. So let's say something like 185 male. Last bit of context, how much sleep hours. We can also pull from Apple Health. So let's go for something like 7 hours and we're pretty active. Let's just go for moderate and never miss a dose. We have some notifications. Enable notifications. Allow. And then look at this. Look at the screen. This is like that psychological personalization screen. And then it shows us our personalized plan. So you're going to see this a lot in health apps where they ask for your data and then By working together, they curate the perfect plan for you to, track your calories and that stuff. In this case, for Tropin, we're going to be tracking each time we hop on a dose for the peptide, the cycle, and we're tracking all our health metrics. And then we take a look at our health plan. We then get hit with the paywall. Now, the paywall, I think, is a bit lackluster and needs more visuals to be a bit more appealing. However, this is a health app. You don't want to go overly crazy. You want to be appropriate in the terms that you need to be more, you need to be less moderate on crazy, overly stimulated stuff that are like replicative of like all those other productivity apps, because this is health, right? This is very important where you're asking for user data, you're committing to a journey. You want to keep it more like, you want to keep it more real with the user. So it's not bad. However, again, I don't like there's too much text. And so this is the paywall, right? We can choose with the annual plan or the monthly plan. I think Claude might have forgotten, but we're actually running a weekly plan. So that'll get changed. But you have a 3-day free trial, and then we start a free trial. And then obviously we don't have revenue cat configured, but that is our onboarding flow. Now, there is stuff to work on, and in the next video, I'll have the onboarding flow fully configured where I'll show everything I did, all the changes, as well as the fully functional app. And then we're gonna get straight into the ASO and the App Store and the marketing, which is the more important part of building your app, which is the more important part aside from building your app. And this is just to show you that you can yourself create an app in your niche and get paying customers.